Germanicus, meanwhile, as he was returning from Egypt, found that all his directions to the legions and to the various cities had been repealed or reversed. This led to grievous insults on Piso, while he as savagely assailed the prince. Piso then resolved to quit Syria. Soon he was detained there by the failing health of Germanicus, but when he heard of his recovery, while people were paying the vows they had offered for his safety, he went, attended by his lictors, drove away the victims placed by the altars with all the preparations for sacrifice and the festal gathering of the populace of Antioch. Then he left for Seleucia and awaited the result of the illness which had again attacked Germanicus. The terrible intensity of the malady was increased by the belief that he had been poisoned by Piso. And certainly, there were found hidden in the floor and in the walls these interred remains of human bodies, incantations and spells, and the name of Germanicus inscribed on leaden tablets, half-burnt cinders smeared with blood, and other horrors by which in popular belief souls are devoted to the infernal deities. Piso too was accused of sending emissaries to note curiously every unfavorable symptom of the illness. This passage is taken from the 69th chapter of the second book of the Annales by Tacitus, in which Germanicus, Roman general and apparent heir of the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, for a brief moment seems to have recovered from a severe illness, only for its symptoms to come back harsher as ever, leading him to think that perhaps he had been poisoned by the ex-governor of Syria, Piso, with whom he didn't have the best of relations. After investigating, he found that his floor and walls were filled with human remains, cinders smeared in blood, and, most importantly, curses written alongside his name on leaden tablets. These were all ways that were known by the Romans to bring misfortune upon somebody by invoking the power of infernal deities. Hello everybody, this is Harmonia Link, and today we'll be covering a topic in theme with the spooky season, ancient Roman curses. More specifically, we'll be briefly covering the so-called Tabellae Defixionum, or more simply, Defixiones, which are inscriptions made on a leaden support, usually taking the shape of very thin tablets. Short disclaimer, I won't be going into specifics regarding every single aspect of this type of curses, as probably hours could be spent talking about them, but I'll try to cover the main details so that by the end of this video you can have a general understanding of this practice and perhaps some interest to read something about it yourself, as I'll be leaving down in the description a bunch of sources for all the curious minds out there. As always, before beginning, if any of you are not subscribed to the channel, I'd like to offer the possibility of subscribing if you like the content that I make, to like the video if by the end of it you think it was entertaining and informative enough, and to comment any type of suggestion or critique that might go through your thoughts. It helps way more than I can explain by words alone, and I'd be grateful. That said, let's get into today's topic. Let's begin by stating that these Roman inscriptions belong to the wider group of religious inscriptions, among which we find public ones found on temples and other public buildings or works, and the more private inscribed prayers and votive offerings. Now, truth be told, the Tabellae Defixionum also belong to the wider Mediterranean world, rather than being a purely Roman occult craft, but my studies focus mainly on the Latin side of the world, so that's what I'll be mainly describing and showing in the video. Besides, Rome conquered the Mediterranean anyway. Anyway, going back to the religious inscriptions, this type of inscriptions followed certain formulas dictated by tradition and simplicity, as inscribing a solid object is not quite as easy as writing on paper, as you can imagine. Professional inscribers existed, and, especially for public works, they were employed and then paid for their job, thus, to save up on time, and therefore money, some specific formulas and abbreviations came to be accepted, and any Roman could very well understand an entire inscription that to us could look like a bunch of letters and unintelligible words. This, of course, expanded beyond the public sphere, and private inscribed prayers included at least these three elements in their formulation: the name of the deity to whom the offering was made to, the name of the person that was offering, and the reason to why this offering was being made, commonly accompanied with a spiritual and legal binding of the offerer to eventually sacrifice something when the invoked deity would have accomplished the request. Votive offerings were made continuously for all sorts of things: requests and thanks for health, having children, political and military victories, and so on. generally all socially accepted things to ask for in one's life. However, what happens when somebody with malicious intents desires, instead of their own or someone else's good, the downfall of somebody? Well, that's where the Tabellae Defixionum enter our discussion. As a concept, these tablets were pretty much analogous to the aforementioned inscribed prayers. Someone wanted a deity to do something for them, so they wrote their requests down and waited for the results, ending with the usual sacrifice of something in return for the aid given. There were some crucial differences, however, to the socially accepted and common inscribed prayers. Among all, the main difference was the intent. Instead of asking for prosperity, whether personal or someone else's, the intent was seeking aid to pretty much curse somebody. Let's not forget that wishing harm upon someone was, of course, very badly seen by Roman society, and there were indeed a bunch of laws since the dawn of the Republic that forbid its use, and whoever was found guilty of using magic and enchantments was severely punished afterwards. This said, we can comprehend why it was not a smart idea to use the classic formulas of votive offerings towards any deity one wanted to call upon on this tabulae, as that would mean writing down one's own name, leaving out the possibility that somebody could report you and that law might take its course, with all the consequences. Furthermore, it could have also been seen as a bad thing to add one's own name on the curse, as it might have led to cursing oneself by accident. Then, proceeding with the differences with other inscriptions, we have the choice of materials. These tablets, as we read in the beginning, were made of lead, this for multiple reasons. First of all, they were supposed to be easily inscribed on, but at the same time they were meant to be easily disposed of and folded, as it was common practice to fold the leaden tablet and then stab it across with a nail. Second, lead was a material associated to chthonic, or generally infernal deities. In this case, infernal meaning simply of the underworld rather than specifically hellish. Now, about what was actually inscribed on the tablet, here is where everyone could shine in creativity, as this is the part where the author of the tablet would write down their curse. Things such as misfortune in love, illnesses, incantations to attract someone, bad performance in public games, the list is long. But one sure thing that was always present was the name of the target, sometimes repeated more than once. In any case, this part tended to follow the usual Roman standardized formulas, but some tablets were found to be more free in style. Still, a key difference from public formulas is that the Latin used could be quite rustic and not so elegant as something taken out of, let's say, a classical Latin author such as Livy. Once everything was inscribed, as previously said, the tablet was folded and stabbed with a nail, hence the name Defixiones, meaning nailed or stabbed. With that done, the curse was then hidden away, whether, as we've read in Tacitus's work, in the proximity of the target, or even just simply underground, concluding the entire process. This is pretty much what we know regarding the making of these curse tablets, as we don't really know for sure if there was any specific standardized ritual with chanting, specific sacrifices, or anything of the sorts. The Tabellae Defixionum were not the only way to curse somebody in ancient Rome, but they surely make a nice reference to include in your horror stories or world building. There would be much more to talk about on this topic, from some Defixiones being made for protection from harm rather than actively searching to harm somebody, or even the Defixiones calling upon none other than Jesus Christ, but this is as much time as I had today. So, now that you know how to properly curse somebody in a proper Roman fashion, if you liked the video, be sure to take that like button, fold it on itself and stab it across with a nail, and if you're feeling generous enough, to do the same with the subscribe button. Once more, a special thanks to my tippers on TP, Benjamin and Jacob, that make these videos possible by giving me the means to buy the sources that I use to make my research. I really appreciate you guys a lot. This was Harmonia Link, have a happy Halloween, and I'll see you next time.